Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to the Windward Buddhist Temple's virtual Dharma service. We will begin the service this morning with the chanting of the Vandana Ti-Sarana. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to him, the exalted one, the enlightened one, the supremely awakened one. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. I go to the Buddha for guidance. I go to the Dharma for guidance. I go to the Sangha for guidance. Namo Abhidavus, Namandao, Namandao, Namandao. The sutra for today is 12 Homages. 12 Homages is a Japanese version, the English version of the Junidai, which was composed by the first of the Shin Buddhism's Pure Land masters, Nagarjuna of India. Namandam, 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 Namandam. Gods and men all bow in awe to Amida the revered in Buddha's wondrous pure land. Bodhisattvas gather round, golden form like the mountain king, steadfast like the elephant's pace, Buddha's eyes like the blue lotus. Thus I bow to Amida, Buddha's form round like the moon, bright like thousand suns and moons. Buddha's voice like the nightingale. Thus I bow to Amida, Buddha's figure on Kanon's crown, adorned with wondrous features. Buddha subdues evilness. Thus I bow to Amida, beyond compare Amida's pure virtue shining clear like space. All benefit from Buddha. Thus I bow to Amida, Bodhisattvas all renowned, Maras to praise Amida, primal vow made for our sake. Thus I bow to Amida, Golden ponds where lotus bloom, towers a throne of goodness. Buddha lives like the mountain king. Thus I bow to Amida. Bodhisattvas come afar, attaining true happiness. They revere the Buddha's face. Thus I bow to Amida. All life changes like the dew. We have no permanent self. Buddha teaches this law to all. Thus I bow to Amida. No evil in the Pure Land, and no fear of evil paths. Faithful hearts honor Buddha. Thus I bow to Amida, saving us through many ways. No tempters, no evil friends. Birth leads to enlightenment. Thus I bow to Amida. Amida, thus I have praised. Virtues boundless like the sea. These virtues shared with others, for birth into the Pure Land. Nama, 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 The virtue of Amida's vow is shared equally by all, together attaining awakened mind. We are born in the land of peace. Namanda, 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 Namanda. The recitation for today is Shinshu Pledge 1. And this is found on page 6 of the Red Service book. I take my refuge in the vow of the Buddha. Reciting the name, I will live through life with strength and serenity. I revere the light of the Buddha. I will put my effort in my work with self-reflection and gratitude. I follow the teachings of the Buddha, discerning the right path. I will spread the true Dharma. I rejoice in the compassion of the Buddha. I will respect and help others and do my best for the welfare of humankind. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Well, good morning, everyone. And once again, welcome to the Windward Buddhist Temple's weekly Sunday Dharma service. Last week, we had a student lay speaker, Wyatt Fujikawa. And for those of you that tuned into it and watched it, you must have been as impressed as I was at his maturity in delivering his message of gratitude. You know, it is always wonderful that we have young people such as Wyatt and others that are willing to share the Dharma with us. We're pleasantly surprised at their understanding of the teachings. So in the future, we should feature more of the youth in our services. So now let's put our hands together in reverence as I read the words of Shinran Shonin. The light of wisdom exceeds all measure, and every finite being receives this illumination that is like the dawn. So take refuge in Amida, the true and real light. Namo Amida Butsu, Namanda Butsu, Namanda Butsu. Two important concepts in Shin Buddhism is the idea of self-power and other power, or that of power beyond the self, power that is beyond the self. And many people believe that Amida Buddha is something of a personal savior, like that of a god in Christianity, and that the other term, other power, refers to the power of that Buddha. This power beyond the self refers to the Dharma, or the ultimate truth that Buddhism teaches us. It is that everything exists because of causes and conditions, that nothing exists by itself. Self-power, on the other hand, is a failure to recognize that we exist because of others, and that we have something permanent and independent within us, and that we exist by ourselves. Maeda Center's Dr. Haneda refers to this as an overestimation of our own abilities. He says that the person of the power beyond the self has a correct view of himself, and that Buddhism teaches us that we are initially self-power oriented and have an infatuated view of ourself. And that through Buddhism, we recognize this mistake and become the persons of the power beyond the self who has the right view of the self. So to illustrate the idea that self-power means an overestimation of our own abilities, he tells a personal story of his experience of losing the use of both of his hands because of an accident. And the story goes like this. He said that about 35 years ago, he and his wife moved from Chicago to Berkeley. Well, 1 month before the move, he broke both of his elbows when he slipped and fell on a Chicago street. One evening, he was walking on a sidewalk and tripped over an iron bar that had stretched from a parking lot. And he fell down like a bowling pin. His eyeglasses flew away from his face. Those were his own words. As he fell down, he instinctively protected his head with his two arms, just as a boxer protects his head from his opponent's attack to his head. But his two elbows that protected his head landed directly on the concrete pavement and received the full impact. Both of his elbows were broken, and he felt extreme pain. Then an ambulance came and took him to the hospital. After a few hours, he underwent an emergency operation on his right elbow that had multiple fractures. So before the surgery, though, the doctor told his wife that he might permanently use the use of his right arm. But fortunately, the operation was successful, and he was able to retain the use of his right arm. A couple of days later, he had another operation, and this time to his left elbow. He said that the pain that he experienced after the second surgery was quite unbearable. He remained in the hospital for 2 weeks after the surgeries. All throughout the time in the hospital, he was laying on his back, with his two arms in two large casts. Those two casted arms had to be lifted above the level of his heart. And friends who visited him in the hospital commented that he looked exactly like a lobster. And so while he was in the hospital, he could not use his hands at all. So he couldn't do anything by himself. He could not eat or drink by himself, could not bathe or change his own clothes. He was just like a baby. The nursing staff and his wife had to do everything for him. They were constantly helping him. Before that experience, he never thought that he could lose the use of both of his hands. When he did lose their use, he realized for the first time in his life that he could live without using his hands. So many people were actually supporting and helping him. So they were enabling him to live. He then realized that what his visible hands could do was limited. While it was limited, many invisible hands were doing tremendous work for him. A few days after being discharged from the hospital, he received a phone call from the Institute of Buddhist Studies, the IBS, in Berkeley, California. So they told him that there was an emergency meeting to be held in several days at the Graduate Theological Union, and they wanted him to attend that meeting. He had been previously hired by the Institute as an interim dean and was supposed to start work in about 2 weeks. But when he received the call, both of his arms were still in casts, and he couldn't move his hands at all. But since they said that it was a very important meeting in which a joint program of IBS and the Graduate Theological Union was to be discussed, he was expected to attend along with a representative from IBS. So he had no choice but to go to Berkeley to attend the meeting. So his wife, Tomoko, packed the necessary items and clothing in his bag and hung the bag from his neck because he couldn't carry it with his hands. He seriously doubted whether he could successfully go all the way to Berkeley from Chicago, because of his condition. But off he went to the O'Hare International Airport outside of Chicago. And upon arriving at the airport, he suddenly realized that all the worries he had about the trip was actually not necessary. When people noticed that both of his hands were in a cast, they offered to help him. A gentleman offered to carry his bag. And on the plane, a flight attendant brought a couple of pillows and placed them under both of his elbows. She also helped him to eat and to drink. And upon arriving in San Francisco, many people helped him. So he had a very smooth and uneventful trip and went back to Chicago safely. So before the accident on the Chicago sidewalk, he had been overestimating the abilities of his hand, his self-power, and neglecting to appreciate other people's hands with a power beyond the self. He recognized the fact that other people's hands had been supporting him all the time, although he was not aware of it. This incident and the following events on his road to recovery was a humbling experience, and at the same time, a wonderful and awakening experience as well. In past Dharma messages, you have heard me mention the story of Hisako Nakamura, one that is another example of the issue of self-power and other power. When Hisako was a young girl, she lost all 4 of her limbs due to frostbite. She did not have an easy life and was kept in a closet because to her family, a child like that would be an embarrassment for the rest of the family. But her mother had tough love for Hisako and taught her to do everything, writing, calligraphy, cooking, sewing, knitting, all with her mouth and a small remaining part of her arm. She hated her mother as a child and considered her to be a devil because she was so strict. However, later in life as an adult, Chisaku grew deeply grateful for her mother's tough love. She became a Buddhist in later life and a devoted follower of Shinran. As she grew older, she was deeply grateful to the many people for their help and for their support. In one of her statements, she quoted that, "If it were not for the support of so many people, I, without my 4 limbs, would not have been able to live." In reflecting her daily life living with her husband, she said, "How pitiful and shallow it may seem, the simple fact that I even reflect on myself making so many complaints to my husband and daughter for even a blink of an eye is entirely based on the working of Amida Buddha." As Shinran says in the Hymns of the Dharma Ages, "Such is the benevolence of Amida's great compassion that we must strive to return it even to the breaking of our bodies. Such is the benevolence of the masters and true teachers that we must endeavor to repay it even to our bones becoming dust." It can be seen from the stories that I just related to you that the truth of Buddhism is that of conditional co-arising, that everything exists because of causes and conditions. We are able not only to exist, but thrive as a result of the benevolence of people and of all things animate and inanimate. As Haneda says, we are not passive recipients of other people's kindness. We do not sit in passiveness waiting for other people's kindness. Because we understand the power of the other, we in turn do not just stand still, but make every effort to repay the kindness of our own effort, by our own effort. And from the writings of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a Swiss psychiatrist, the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. Thank you very much for listening. And now will you please join me once again by putting your hands together in Gassho. Through the benefit of the unhindered light, we will realize Shinjing of various majestic virtues, and the ice of our blind passions necessarily melts, immediately becoming water of enlightenment. Nabo Amidabuts. Namandavas. We will conclude today's service with the Gatha, Homeward I Go, followed by the Nembutsu.
Seek Amida Ti.
Namo Amida. Namo Amida. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida. Namo Amida Butsu. Whatever suffering there is in this world, it all arises from desiring only myself to be happy. Whatever joy in this world, it all arises from desiring to share my happiness with everyone. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Well, thank you very much for joining us in this service this morning. And will you please join with us again next week. Next week will be our monthly remembrance service. Thank you, and in the meantime, keep well. Goodbye.